Get started. I'm Nicole Yelsey. Thank you everyone so much for being here today, and especially to Greg and Maria for being here, for making this film, and for talking to us about the great work that they're doing. Before we get started, we're just going to share a little bit about the series. This is the third in a resiliency series that the Booth Alumni Club of Chicago has been in partnership with the Rustandy Center for Social Innovation, as well as the Booth Alumni Nonprofit Consultants. A little bit about the Booth Alumni Club of Chicago. So we are a nonprofit, volunteer, alumni-run organization, really with three purposes: to build relationships between Booth alumni in Chicago, both with each other and the community, promote the exchange of ideas, and then as well as give opportunities for lifelong learning and continued education with the Booth Network. Rustandy Center for Social Sector Innovation, if you're not as familiar with them, they are the home for social impact at Booth for people committed to tackling complex social and environmental problems. And they're really all about promoting innovation, advancing research, developing people and practices that accelerate social change and play a critical role in the University of Chicago's larger social impact mission. We're really excited to have Carolyn Grossman here to moderate the conversation. And then a little bit about Bank, if you're not familiar with them and you're interested in learning more, the website is there, and I think Caroline is going to share it in the chat as well. So Bank is a 6-year-old network of alumni volunteers who match alumni volunteers with nonprofits for consulting services to support critical business problems. It's a great benefit to alumni. It gives you the opportunity to connect with other alumni, connect with the city, connect with nonprofits in the city, as well as just get involved with the Booth community and the greater community for Chicago at large. Obviously, some fantastic benefits to the nonprofits as well, supplementing resources, giving them an outside expertise, and there's a wide variety of projects, no matter what your expertise is. So if you're interested in learning more, I think again Caroline's going to put that in the chat as well there. And then before we get started on the great event we have today, I wanted to share a little bit about some other upcoming programs. The Booth Alumni Club has Coffee and Conversations. This is, I believe, the 6th that we've done since COVID started. It's a 1-hour kind of speed networking with other alumni clubs around the Chicago area. This upcoming one is with Booth, Ross, UT Macomb, Kellogg, and Stanford on May 4th. And then the Rustandy Virtual Onboard Conference is currently in the midst. Some fantastic sessions have already occurred this month. And there's 2 more days coming up on May 7th and May 21st. And then 2 other events out of the Rustandy Center coming up in May: Innovating for Social Equity, the intersection of religion and business, fantastic conversation there. And then Social Impact Leadership Series, how strengthening communities can solve some of the world's pressing problems. You see some of the great work that Rustandy is doing and leading there for the school. So without further ado, it's my pleasure again. Thank you so much to Maria and Greg for again making this film and for being here today. And for Carolyn, Carolyn is the executive director of Rustandy. She's also an 03 Booth alum, and she leads all that great work that I previously mentioned that the Rustandy Center is leading at Booth. She's also an adjunct assistant professor at Booth, and she's created several classes at Booth, including a lab course that is called CSR Social Impact Practicum that actually allows students to dive in deep and do hands-on work with some of the, really considering how a firm plays a greater role in society. And if you, I just also wanted to mention, hopefully everyone has had a chance to watch this fantastic film. If you hadn't, it'll be available until May 2nd. So the link will also be included in the email following this. Hand it over to you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for bringing all of us together today. And thanks everyone for joining. I hope that if you've had a chance, I know that if you've had a chance to watch the movie, you were as moved and your mind was provoked as much as mine. And if you haven't, don't hang up now, because the conversation is still going to be rich and interesting, and the film will be there, which is great. What I'd like to start off by talking about, Maria, Greg, is how did we get here today to be telling this story?
Greg, I think we should kick that one to you.
All right, fine. I will start off. Well, you know, with documentaries, I always like to say that sometimes we find our documentary subjects and sometimes they find us. And this was definitely a case of the documentary finding us. It actually started with a friend of ours who went on to become the co-producer, Amy Ostrander, who was talking with a friend at like a dinner party outside back when we could do that years and years ago, 2013, 2014. And this was somebody who was, deeply, deeply engaged with and invested in Cara. And he was saying it's this amazing organization, and he always thought it would make for a great documentary. He was talking about sort of the hoop dreams of Cara. And Amy said, I happen to know a couple guys who do that. Maybe I should connect you. So we met Mark Carroll, and Mark then introduced us to Cara. And we went in to see the amazing work that they do, the morning motivations, which is something that everybody should experience. And then just talking with the leadership and the staff and the participants, it's one of those things where sometimes with documentary topics, the more you learn, the more you start to think, maybe this isn't such a good idea. And everything that we saw and everything that we learned made us say, no, these are amazing people and these are amazing stories. And this is a window on something that is much larger than just Cara. And it just confirmed that it would make for a good documentary. So we started filming in the fall of 2015 and really started engaging with the cohort in January of 2016. And now we finally have a film.
Great. So certainly watching the film, I know that regardless of when the film had been filmed, we wouldn't be watching something that was filmed during COVID today. Watching the movie, certainly we see that it's in a moment prior to the one we are in now. But the story is so relevant today. So Maria, could you tell us a bit about Cara and what makes this story and this issue so urgent today?
Yeah, in a weird way, I've been chomping at the bit for the film to be out years ago when it was kind of initially close to being done. I'm like, come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. And as it turns out, I think it was incredibly fortuitous and really beneficial to this mission and to this cause and to the issue of urban poverty in the country for it to be released in the time of COVID. And so for me to zoom out for a second, for those that aren't familiar with Cara, what we are and who we are is an organization that helps people experiencing homelessness and poverty to get back to work. And at the same time, helping employers to become more inclusive in the process. So we have everything from boot camps and businesses that help to employ individuals and ready them for more permanent employment in the larger job landscape, and have been doing that now for 30 years. For me, this film does three things. Three things that I think are incredibly important right now, this year, this moment. First of all, it helps us to see the issue and the inequities that create urban poverty in the first place through the lens of real people. I think people can talk about kind of the levers and the drivers of urban poverty in the abstractions, but until they see it through the lens of real people, they don't understand and care about it more deeply to their core. That's issue one. The other opportunity that this film has given is to kind of help people to understand the human condition of people experiencing poverty. We have so many misconceptions around how people find their way to poverty in the first place that this film allows us to myth bust and to show the human condition of people actually experiencing the trappings of poverty over time. And the third big thing for me that this film can do is kind of to give us something to put our back into. We've spent this last year slowly becoming more broken as a country, if I can be totally transparent, and broken in the sense of not just exposing the health disparities that COVID has brought to life, but in exposing the great inequities of racial injustice. We have an uprising in our country of us waking up to centuries old injustices. And what we want to do, what we have an opportunity to do right now is to let employers and people, so let institutions and individuals do more than maybe post a black box on their Instagram feed. Do more than maybe just have a message in solidarity to people that have experienced injustice, but to actually give them a pathway towards how to build a more inclusive economy. And I believe that this film can be one step on that larger continuum towards getting us there.
So Maria, it would help, that's great. It would help if you could go a bit deeper into what is Cara. Some of us who saw the film have recently, therefore, been inside Cara through the movie. Some of us may have been there on other occasions, and some still have a chance to go in. But could you just take a moment to take us inside? What do you do
Yes.
there?
So inside the organization, it is not an ordinary job training shop. So it is not just about kind of helping people build the workplace competencies to be ready for today's workplace. It is also in large part about helping people heal from past hurts, past regrets, past injustices, past, in order to recognize they have the personal resilience to stay on topic for this month's theme or for this campaign's theme, but that they have the je ne sais quoi, they have the self-agency, they have the to be able to recover from the past and really visualize their future. So in addition to workplace competencies, we also focus on social emotional skills. We focus on what we need to do to love ourselves again, to forgive other people that have wronged us, to forgive ourselves of how we might have wronged other people, and to do these things to recover as people so that we can also build skills as professionals. And for some people that might be listening to this, especially B School alum, they might be listening to me being like, oh, Maria, that's really woo-woo. Like your way, like what are you talking about? And to those individuals, I'll say, you know, if you don't know what it's like to be knocked off your square time and time and time again, and you don't know what it's like to have the esteem blown out of you, then you might not recognize like all the things that can destabilize ourselves and can convince us that we can't do what we can actually do as people, and that the circumstances that drive urban poverty in our country are so much larger than what people might think. People think that people choose poverty when in fact poverty can often be inherited, generation over generation, zip code over zip code, and it's if you've gone through life thinking all of those things, then you start to believe that your options are limited, not limitless. And so at Cara, I guess half of what we're doing is about building the skills to help people re-enter the workplace, but also about building the hope and the esteem to kind of reverve and regenerate yourself in the process.
Wow. So I know that people don't choose poverty, but Greg, as you made a movie about it, you made some choices and you chose whose stories to tell. And could you tell us about what that process is like with a bunch of B School, mostly alums, some students on? We don't know so much about how to make movies, or I don't. So how do you do it?
Well, first of all, I always say that, like, you know, the 12-year-old kid with editing software can probably do my job better than I can, but still, I think fortunately we have enough storytelling experience to kind of have a sense of how to engage in what is invariably a fraught and complicated process. There's no clear-cut path ever to making one of these. And so in this case, what we started off doing, what we thought we could do, is kind of meet the potential subjects early on in the process, even before they got to Cara, because I think we wanted to see how did they get to Cara and then follow them beyond that. So we went to a number of shelters around Chicago, and we introduced ourselves and met lots of folks. But then it became apparent that the sheer uncertainty and precarity of poverty, of that living in that world, means that there's just absolutely no way to predict who is going to get to Cara, if they get to Cara, and when. So we had to kind of change course and decided that the only way to really do this was to just start diving in, start filming a class and see who emerges. And the class, as people see in the film, the first month, the boot camp or the gate that everybody has to proceed through is the transformations class that Jesse teaches. And so we just embedded ourselves in that class in January 2016 and kind of watched and observed and just were present. And over time, individuals started to kind of stand out for various reasons. Kristen is so brilliant in such a quick mind, and clearly kind of a creative force and leader waiting to happen. And that emerged very quickly. Elisa, despite her struggles, somehow managed to maintain this kind of vibrant spirit and really actively and visibly wrestled with what Jesse was trying to get across. So she emerged in that way. And then Tamala, we had actually met before in one of the shelters, and she always has this kind of nobility and regality to her. She is somebody who it's like somewhere in a past life she ruled a land, and that just always shows up. And so she was a compelling figure. And then Clarence, despite his quiet, just carried himself in a way that everybody seemed to like and respect him. And so as the time went on, we began to kind of focus on those 4 individuals and one other who we ended up not including in the film. And then, kind of out of that class, began to follow them over the next 2 years. And the coin of the realm in any documentary is always trust. And that's the most challenging thing to build, especially for people for whom trust can sometimes be dangerous. And it's certainly not a habit that they, or a skill that they have, because they're living in worlds where often you can't trust anybody. So we had to, it always takes time and trust. And a lot of what it is just showing up. And you show up enough, they start to think, wow, you're really strange, but you care. And you're in this with us. And I think that's how we sort of ended up on the journey with our subjects.
Greg, I think that point of trust is so resonant, and I'm gonna break that fourth wall and say, I'm the moderator, but I'm also gonna react, and I'm also gonna encourage those of you on this Zoom to also react. So you're welcome to. There aren't so many of us that you have to be silent. Feel free to jump in either on the chat or raise your hand if you've got something to say. And as I think about that point of trust, Greg, certainly when you follow someone over a period of time, the story is never going to be perfect and intact. And the moment of, it comes up that somebody is lying, and that then gets laid bare, you can only tell that story if there is trust. So I was really struck by that. As we think about this as a story of the Cara program and of Cara, it's also a story of poverty in America. And Maria, you talked about myth busting, but can you help contextualize what the participants in Cara experience and how that fits into the context of poverty in Chicago and America today?
I mean, I would say, order of magnitude on myth busting. So is that shorthand for Cara? I'd say people find their way to us by way of misfortune or misstep. I used to say that back in the day because I was a bit of an alliteration freak. If I could say things that start with the same consonant, it's easier for me to remember. So I'd say, people found their way to Cara by way of misfortune or misstep. Misfortune being generational poverty, being a health incident that upended a household, being a victim of domestic violence, being a misstep, being justice involvement perhaps, or making a mistake that kind of took somebody out of the mainstream economy. What I realize more importantly now is that there are 3 ways people find their way to Cara: misfortune, misstep, or injustice, to contextualize the larger landscape of variables at play. And some of the myth busting that I've seen over time is, we've had folks come to our program that have PhDs. I had in the last year before COVID, a participant that I worked with who was a Princeton undergrad, who was a high-flying, high-performing financier for decades, and then fell in the way of addiction, and in his journey downward through addiction, got out of employment. And then once he was out of the workforce for 3 months, became 6 months, 6 months became a year, he lost his way and thought he wasn't capable of doing anything. And so here you had somebody who on paper very much had the lived experience of someone who was crushing it, who now, because he fell victim to this disease and lost his esteem, lost his way in the process, couldn't find his way back without the help of a larger community around him. And so he didn't fit the stereotype of what people imagine when they say an individual living in poverty. And so I want people to understand when they imagine, how people find their way to poverty in our country, is to remember it doesn't discriminate based on education. It doesn't discriminate based on experience. I could be in a situation right now and have a health issue, disrupt my entire household and now find my way gone. Or I could have made a mistake and stolen something from a grocery store because that was the only way that I could provide for my family in a moment of crisis. And so I wonder if we can all ask ourselves, are we all the sum total of our worst mistake? Or are we instead kind of the reflection of experiences that, give us this pathway towards choices, and then understand we're all in this together and what can we do to help each other find our way back out?
So, Maria, there's an ethos of dignity around Cara and around the work that you do that I think is incredibly powerful, and really the opposite of us, them, people in poverty, looking in, looking out. And it's so powerful and it's so spot on. But I'm wondering how, Greg, you told the story in such a way that it's not voyeurism. So many of the stories of poverty that are in the media are, look at this happening over there, as if the reader or audience is not this over there, but that over here. How do we undo that? And how did you undo that for those who watched the film?
Yeah, that is something that we give a lot of thought to, because that's the last thing we want this to be, is the sense of voyeurism or poverty porn or whatever. So there's all kinds of ingredients that go into that, and decisions that go into that, in both in filming and choices that are made in the edit room, so on. But I would say, one enormous aspect of it in this case is Jesse, so having Jesse as the kind of through line through the film, and in many ways the voice and the spirit guiding the film, I think it makes it sort of by osmosis kind of makes the whole film have that ethos of dignity. Because one of the things that we experienced while we were filming was that you would leave the classroom and we would be loading up the equipment in the car and saying to each other, did Jesse look into your soul today too? And we would all talk about the lessons that Jesse imparted that really hit home in profound ways for each of us. And so I think it's one of those things, it's like any organization that says, these are human beings who deserve the things and treatment that is as good as anybody with any amount of money. That the fact that Jesse is talking about these issues and approaching them in a way that is as profoundly impactful for people who are very comfortable as it is profoundly impactful for people who are desperately uncomfortable, I think is already takes us a long way toward that kind of pervasive sense of dignity that Cara offers. I think it's also one of those things where, for us, we kind of knew from the very beginning that the film, even though it wouldn't be about an issue, that every frame is about the intersection of race, place, and poverty as well. So I think having Jesse as an African-American man, and then with characters who are all people of color, I think if Jesse is not Black, then it becomes a really very different and horribly ill-advised film. So I think there are really complicated layers of race that we deliberately did not create a filter for the audience through, but we just wanted people to experience in that way, the way that people do, which is just, it's a lived reality day to day. So that's just a couple of the things that I think we hope put you into the movie and make it maybe either if you have people in your lives who have experienced these things, or you yourself have experienced these things, it's a emotional, powerful experience of, I know that's my aunt, that's my niece, that's my cousin. And if you don't have that in your life, maybe you get at least a there, but for the grace of God go I. I have a sort of visceral confrontation with how close we all are to ending up in one of those chairs.
So I think that Pranav has a question that's a really nice follow on to this. Pranav, I see your video on. Do you want to just unmute and ask your question?
All right. Hi guys, I'm singing in from India, but I love the movie. I saw it twice actually. So yeah, I had a very intriguing question. You know, it also sinks in with a lot of stuff that happens in real life when you're just so ecstatic and happy about things that happen to you in an unsynchronized way, and you go back and feel that you are super happy. Maybe having too much of ice cream is a good example of that. But I forget the name of the character, but when the lady was being questioned by the set of people who gave her a job after Cara and said that, why have you not been coming to work? And she said, you know what, I was enjoying my freedom just sitting there for 2 days, 2 hours in the park. Was giving me that sense of happiness, because I have never actually gone through that. How did you pick that story up? Because that's just such a reality for all of us that happen, for things that are not necessarily as complicated as that, because that's a very, very powerful moment to really depict in a tough scenario, of course. How did you pick that up as a point of infusion in the way you kind of weaved in the entire movie? That's my question.
Oh, thank you for that question. Thank you for picking out that one scene, because we love that particular scene. I think it is, the movie in a lot of ways is about the combination of the small internal and external obstacles that prevent people from kind of rejoining the mainstream economy, as much as it is about the giant structural forces that keep them there too. So you think about a scene like that, or a similar scene to me is when Kristen is potentially going to be losing her housing, and she says, of the people who are doing this to her, they go home at night and they have locks on their doors. Like, that one line is such a powerful statement about just the importance to mental health of personal space.
Yeah.
Of the capacity to move as you want. You don't see anybody drive until you see Elisa going to sign her lease. So just transportation and mobility equals freedom. They can't leave the shelters after a certain time. If you don't fold your laundry, you don't get to use the washing machines, that kind of thing. So these are, once you sort of fall into this kind of poverty, you're then governed by not just a whole, literally thousands of laws and rules that are going to restrict you in a number of ways, but also a zillion social and cultural restrictions, and just kind of practical logistical restrictions that make it almost impossible to climb back. And that's one of the great things that I think Cara does, is it sort of acknowledges both the internal and the external forces that are holding people back. So that's one where, anybody in Elisa's position probably would have done the same thing and hoped they would have gotten away with it. And it was an important lesson, but it is, as you said, incredibly revealing about just what the constraints and limitations that poverty puts on somebody.
Greg, I think what's interesting about what you just shared is that you kept using the word freedom. And in a way, the context that you're putting this scenario into is like, it's a different form of incarceration, to be completely blunt, because you don't poverty kind of constricts you and doesn't give you the level of latitude and independence that we all as humans crave. And so that makes for very much why that scene with Elisa was so incredibly powerful in that moment.
And
Thanks for bringing that up.
It speaks to respect and dignity too. I just finished reading halfway home the Reuben Miller book from he's an SSA professor, it talks about that too. Just the sort of, he calls it the afterlife of incarceration, and just the kind of visible and invisible constraints that are always there, and that that are so grinding. I mean, I just think about how restrictive it's been for the last year for all of us, and how just emotionally grueling it is. And when you sort of have that as your everyday, man, that's hard work to get out of.
So I'm going to ask a question about feelings now, which is inspired by Judith's question that we can see in the chat, which is that the perspective of ethos and voyeurism is profound for Judith, as she struggled how to put herself in their shoes. And she asks a question, which is, should I be feeling pity, guilty because of my privilege, empowered that I can help? And I'm going to ask you both that. But the question of what anyone should feel is, as I'm sure, Judith, you know, is really hard. So maybe not should, and what do you feel? If we can talk about feelings at a Chicago booth event.
I think sometimes when I talk about Cara, I say this is a place where people can talk about the feelings equal to the finance of poverty. So I think that that's kind of half the ticket right there. And for Judith's question, which I appreciate very much, I'd like to build off of what Greg shared earlier, when you had asked him that question about voyeurism. And part of what Jesse teaches in the film and in regular life is you cannot teach where you do not go. You cannot teach where you do not go. And Jesse, as kind of an instrumental teacher, makes as part of his education of others and his engagement of others, his own vulnerability and his own authenticity and his own sharing of his story. And so to Judith, I'd say, I don't want you to feel sorry. And in fact, I even think Jesse says that in a line in the film. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't want you to have pity. I want you to get to know me. I want you to be curious about my lived experience. I want you to focus on deepening your empathy around my or other individuals' lived experience, so that collectively we can advance towards equity. And so to me, that is just the how to get there, is a how of mutuality. And if you, Judith, want to share your stories equal to your curiosity about someone else's lived experience and have them share as well, then together that curiosity helps us to understand, what got us to where we are today. And that greater context helps us to understand how we can collectively move forward.
So I'm going to just stay with feelings a little bit longer. And Greg, ask you what it's like I don't know what it's like to be on set, right? Even just I once went to a set to film a commercial for A1 Steak Sauce. So that was my experience on set. And it felt very glamorous, but even just saying that, right? What's it like to be on set? This isn't really set. This is life. You're people, you have emotions. How did you and the team grapple with that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, you are literally on set right now in our world. Like, just wherever you are is kind of the set. It's a lot of times it's, you for something like this, you try to keep as skeletal a crew as possible. So often it was, us and a camera person, or even just John, my co-director, who did a lot of the filming after, with the individuals after Transformations was done. And, you are part of it and you affect things certainly, but you also, through that trust and through the kind of showing up again and again and again and again, you get people just used to that process. So in a situation like when Jesse has to let Clarence go from the program, you watch that show now, or watch that scene in COVID, and you're like, how can 3 people be in such a tightly packed room? But like, that was only possible because both Jesse and Clarence John had just come to be part of the scenery. And so, of course, he was going to be allowed into that. But it is always, it is difficult and it is emotionally challenging. And there are occasional times where, for example, the last day of Transformations, when Jesse tells his story, after that, they do an exercise where they've written something to somebody where each of the participants has written something to somebody who has wronged them. And in a kind of ceremonial way, they seal the envelopes, nobody's read them, and they hand around a trash can and they put everything in the trash can. And then they sort of close their eyes and Jesse plays this gospel song and he sort of just tucks them through letting go of this experience. And it is easily the most powerful thing that I've ever kind of experienced while filming. And some of the footage is ruined. I'm filming it and you can hear me sniffling, ruining the shot during this process. Like, I mean, there were other reasons why we didn't use it, but one of the reasons was because we're crying. So it is, you know, I think Cara invites you to necessarily connect with your emotions. And as Jesse likes to talk about, for a lot of the people who are starting out there, that is something that they have basically suppressed as much as possible. So the risk becomes suddenly they are raw nerves and with emotions that they don't know what to do with because they have not been dealing with them for so long. So part of Cara's role and responsibility after that is to then help them navigate, what do you do when you are starting to feel again? And maybe some of that feeling is hope, and maybe some of that is rage or despair, but there's feelings. And, you know, I think that is like an incredible thing about Cara that you don't see as much of in the film, which is then how they kind of create a hallway for people to navigate the chaos of feeling again.
So for something as complex and human as poverty, I think that it's impossible not to grapple with emotion, but also really, and feelings, but also really important to put back on some of the sense and analytical hat when we tackle them, so that we are thinking about how to make the world truly a better place in addition to this, with this blended approach. And so, Maria, this past year has just laid bare the outsized impact of COVID-19 on BIPOC communities in the US. And this film was made before COVID-19, and a large percentage of participants in Cara are also of BIPOC communities in Chicago. How do we make sense of that? And is it possible to avoid outcomes like the outsized impact of COVID-19 in the future?
That's like the $1 million question. I mean, so many things. So I'm reminded of a line in the film that I can't remember, Greg, what Jesse precisely says, but it's something like topics like racism and injustice and et cetera are so overwhelming for me to consider right now. And in fact, basically the subtext of what he's saying is that that's a constant drumbeat of truth that's in the background of my life each and every day, and often in the foreground. So today I'm not going to deal with the meta. I'm going to deal with one person at a time. That's the solution. So that's Jesse's point of view as he approaches the work. And I would say for us and for the world, you know, our point of view has expanded after this year. I've as a leader of color, but not a Black leader of color, have recognized so much of my own privilege in this work, and have recognized that part of our work for 30 years of readying individuals to re-enter the workplace has also been us conforming to structures and systems that are perseverating certain types of practices that are not inclusive. So it's just like I'm wrestling with my own ironies day in and day out. What is the opportunity opportunity on the other side to recognize that that's exactly what I'm doing, and to now say, well, what can we do with our platform to activate employers in a deeper and more meaningful way to, in fact, upend some of those practices. And so we focus on how to help employers source differently, hire differently, onboard talent in a way that invites people to stick and stay, focus on job quality and support, and focus on what their advancement trajectory can be. And we want to center our participant or people experiencing poverty as a subject matter expert, as a SME in this space, to hold their own up against HR professionals and leaders to say, hey, if you want to build more inclusive workplaces, this is what the conditions and practices and characteristics must be. So I believe that we all have an underleveraged bully pulpit, whether as individuals or as part of larger ecosystems. And to your question about whether we can disrupt the outsized impact moving forward, we absolutely can, but we have to do it. We have to willingly do it. We can't just like sit back. We have to now lean into a larger conversation and understand the power that we actually hold.
There we go. So I could ask you questions all afternoon and late into the evening and tomorrow and so on, but that wouldn't really be fair and people would start to drop off. So let's, I would very much like to open it up. There is a comment from Eunice that I will put out there. And then while that's happening, if folks want to either put your questions into the chat, if you're comfortable, I can ask them, or if you turn on your video, and you should have the option to raise your hand in the reactions tab and you want to ask yourself, please feel free. If your video's on and either you're waving your hand or I see a hand raised there, I'll know to call on you. But I will jump in with Eunice's comment, which is that she loved the movie, especially Jesse, and is compassionate and is curious why Jesse doesn't share his own story on day one instead of waiting to tell the class the day of transformation.
So part of the journey of learning, not just at Cara, but I would argue in any institution, is that in our particular circumstance, we're taking people through a J curve. And in that J curve, and this kind of goes a little bit to what Greg was saying earlier about part of the reason why we do the forgiveness exercise and other things like that is not because our participants historically have not been able to acquire jobs prior to Cara. Of course they have, but the noise of life has invariably gotten in the way over time. That's getting that job to stick and stay over the long term has been a challenge. And so that's why we kind of front load these courses and experiences that are about the digging deep of the feelings that have gotten us to this point in order to mitigate that very component. And when I say we take people through a J curve, that means if you're going to talk about forgiveness, if you're going to talk about love, we have an exercise of how we restore relationships with people with whom we're close, but that we've had a conflict, and how do we restore that love? If we're going to do all of these very deep, probative experiences together, it's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt hard. And it's going to expose and unearth certain feelings that maybe we don't even recognize because we haven't felt them for so long. You know, Jesse would say that we've burnt the nerve endings of these various components of ourselves that we might not even recognize what comes up. But we have to go down in order to slowly step out, and that stepping out can be more sustainable only because we go through that J curve experience. So anyway, long-winded answer to Eunice's question. That's why Jesse doesn't lead with his story. He punctuates with his story so that he can take people through a journey where they're kind of pissed at him, quite honestly, along the way. Like, who do you think you are? Why are you making me hold a mirror to all of these things? Why are you doing this? And then he punctuates it with, because I was there too. And this is what my version of being there looks like. And that discovery kind of being a culminating point or a fulcrum point for our participants to the next phase of their journey with Cara makes the lessons and the experience and the restoration that happens as a result be much more sustainable in the process.
Thanks.
And it's one of the, you know, for the film, we kept it until the end because we wanted, in a sense, to put the audience through that same experience, what the participants experience is. Who is this guy? What is the, you know, the mystery of what in the world is Jesse? That you sort of get through the film, and then, you know, you may have hints, but you are maybe blindsided by the truth of his reality. And I think that is one of the also reasons why we show the same footage at the very beginning of the film as we do at the end of Jesse putting on his tie and his suit in his closet, because in a way it's a way of saying, here is not just looking in the mirror, but do you see him differently now? Now that you know what he went through, do you look at him differently, and do you also understand what that suit represents for him? The amount of kind of control and costume that he has to kind of create in order to do this work. So even though it's all the same footage, do you experience it differently? And that's very intentional.
It's really powerful. I also was really reflecting on Cara's focus on who you project, and on dress and on formal dress, and where we are now in COVID and the cycle of that, and just the interesting evolution on that front. So I want to take a moment. And see. We have a question here on the chat. I will take this next one and then also open it up. I don't see any hands raised, but we have a question that says, how do we compel employers to leave their comfort zone and invest money and effort, principal-led effort, to become more diverse?
I think that we do it first as employees. So eventually, all employers will have to become stronger and stronger in terms of their level of inclusion. Some people feel the pressure more acutely, others are doing it of their own free will. But eventually this is going to become such the norm, like CSR was the norm X years ago. And the reality is, do you want to be at the end of the train, or do you want to be in the front of the car? The front of the car is where the action is, and everyone who is an employee that works for another organization, or if in your audience you have leaders of firms, we have to just question whether what we are doing, what we are holding as proxies for talent inside our organization are actually the right ones. Is it that all these roles need to have X level of education, Y years of experience? Or is it that if I knew a woman like Elisa who is working how many hours a shift at night to take care of her 2 kids, who is hustling on this bus and that bus in order to get to her 5:30 a.m. shift on time, and that's part of her story. Are those stories of lived experience actually more of a proxy for her level of stick-to-itiveness, tenacity, analytical skills, smarts, than whether or not she has a college degree? Question mark. Is it that, and today in our country, where the sensibility as it relates to marijuana, as one example, is changing, do we want to hold tight onto decades-old rules that, quite frankly, are anachronistic, and 2, have over-incarcerated populations of people 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when the war on drugs first started? Or do we want to recognize that those types of offenses are no predictor of an individual's ability to thrive in our workplace? So just kind of holding a mirror to our own practices and saying, are these as inclusive as they could be, or what can I do to further push that barrier to entry down? I believe it is all within our power to change at least one thing, and I believe as employers or leaders of organizations, we can certainly accelerate the process.
Got it. Other questions from the group? Nicole.
My question's kind of going back to the resiliency theme, and we talked a lot about the resiliency of people going through the program. If you could talk a little bit about your personal resiliency, and I think everyone's had an emotional roller coaster over the last year. I'd imagine you become very invested in these people, and they have their wins, they also have their challenges. And how do you kind of think about your own personal resiliency throughout the process?
I mean, I think on the ratio of wins and challenges, so I keep going back to Jesse, but that is because he's truly changed my life over the last decade and a half. I might just get choked up thinking about it, but he'll say, I've never made a mistake. That's sometimes when he's feeling really sassy on a call, he'll say, I've never made a mistake. I've only learned a lot of lessons. And so, Nicole, I guess to your question, like in terms of, there's wins and losses. Absolutely, there are wins and losses, but mostly there are lessons. And I've learned just such a tremendous amount from the population that, I don't know if I would make the context of what is happening at Cara any different than the context of what we all experience in life. And in fact, in preparing for this thing, I went and looked up in the dictionary, what does resilience mean according to Webster? And so Webster's first definition of resilience is an obvious one, capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. But its second one was the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. And the reason why that one resonates with me the most is because that one speaks to a desire. Like we coming out of COVID-19 as a country, we don't need to go back to normal. And in fact, I would love for us to eviscerate that from our vocabulary. What we can do is go forward to next. And so, this second definition of resilience is about the type of world that we want to shape, that we want to form. And so I just would want us to use our power, again, as individuals and as institutions, to create what the next normal can be and not go back to what it was before.
So Greg, Maria, how do we not stop here? What's the call to action?
Caroline is like magic. She publishes things
there
as soon as you
is.
say stuff.
Yes, I was like, not me, that was Caroline. Yeah.
So you could certainly volunteer with Cara. We would love that. You could also, as employers, consider candidates from programs like ours included, but there are programs like ours all across Chicago, all across the country that can help source talent that has been historically overlooked and that has experiences from which we would all learn. And also, if you're struggling as an employer yourself and you're wondering, geez, I have the will. Maria, I promise you, I have the will. I'm just struggling a little bit with the tactical ways. Well, we have that too. We've got institutes where employers can come join us to dig deeper on sourcing and hiring practices, advancement strategies and things of that nature. And we'd love to engage employers in that as well. Greg, what would you build for the film in terms of a call to action?
I mean, I think in that sense, we have discovered that the best thing for us with the film in a way, the role of the film, its use, I think, as a tool, is to be a vehicle for these kind of conversations. That I think watching the struggles and the triumphs of the people in the film, in a way, kind of softens up the conversation. I mean, Cara has this amazing. One of the things that attracted me to it was the way that it bridges what has been kind of the divide in social policy since the Moynihan Report for 60 years, 50 years, which is you have one side saying it's all about personal responsibility, and if it's all about the individual, and that pushes the other side to say, no, you're blaming the victim. This is all about structural forces, and any kind of person's experience will tell you that it is hugely about structural forces, but it's also about supporting individuals so that when the structural forces aren't solved the next day and you have to get to work, you have the tools to get to work. And so what we really want the film to be able to do is bring people who may be on both sides of that divide together for these conversations where they can start to look at what can we do to support the complex needs of individuals to help them become more productive in society. And then also, what can we do to acknowledge and recognize and really start addressing the enormous structural forces that are causing these problems. And so we have an impact campaign where we are starting to get the film out to have community screenings or virtual screenings like this. And I think what we're discovering is that maybe a year and a half ago, we would never have imagined that the really powerful place for this and the core audience may just be corporate. But it is turning out that the reckoning that business and corporate America has had to do over the last year, how do we follow up on our performative gestures to actually create real change, that this film is an incredibly valuable vehicle for that, to have both corporate leaders and employees participate in the conversation. So that's where it's going for us. And from a policy perspective, then it sort of circles to the kind of things that Maria was just talking about. And I would say that if anybody's interested in helping us out, brainstorming, coming up with ideas, how do we get this more seamlessly into the flow and into the networks of corporate DEI and corporate social responsibility and places where this can be of use, please get in touch. We would love to talk with you about it.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Anything I should have asked that I didn't before I hand it off to Nicole?
I think just on Pranav's last question, one thing that I failed to mention because I've been so fired up about the injustice of it all is the business case. So Cara has placed people into over 12,000 jobs, and their one-year retention rate outpaces national norms by 20 points. So my comment to you all is talent is ubiquitous, but as we all know, access and opportunity is not. And do we need champions inside firms to make that case accelerate? Certainly, but there is a base case of the business imperative, the business value that undergirds this as well.
Wow, thank you. I have the chills on this hot day in Chicago. So thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. And Nicole, I know you have a few closing comments.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for doing the work you do, for making this film, and for everyone for joining the conversation today. I think it's just amazing forward progress that you're pushing for. And I think fantastic call to action there at the end, Greg, as well, of how can we think through how to get this film in more people's hands. So appreciate also Carolyn for hosting here, and thank you for everyone for attending. We'll follow up with the film link as well. If anyone did not get a chance, definitely recommend. It'll be open until May 2nd, this Sunday, or rewatch it. I think I will be this weekend. So.